The artificial lights aboard the Zenith Nexus mimicked the gentle glow of dawn on Zero Arc, the neutral planet over which the massive diplomatic carrier orbited. Today marked the first day of the Galactic Union's unification cycle, a period when representatives from hundreds of advanced species gathered to discuss trade agreements, territorial disputes, and resource allocations. In the central administrative hub, Senior Administrator Bellinara's four-lobed brain was processing multiple streams of information simultaneously. Her species, the Vorak, had evolved from prey animals into the galaxy's premier bureaucrats, their hypervigilance now channeled into detecting administrative anomalies rather than predators. "The Andromeda delegation has cleared security," she noted to her assistant, Junior Administrator Kextool, whose 6 fingers moved with practiced efficiency across the translucent aluminum control panel. "The crystalline representatives require separate accommodations due to their light sensitivity, and the Xerian Naval Command has requested additional seating for their auxiliary consciousness modules." Kextool nodded, his gill-like respiration flaps pulsing slightly as he updated the system records. "All delegations are proceeding according to schedule. The council meeting will commence in exactly 47 rotations." Bellinara allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. After 8 cycles of planning, the Galactic Union's most important diplomatic event was unfolding with perfect precision. Even the notoriously unpredictable hive mind representatives had arrived without incident. "Processing Earth delegation credentials now," Kextool announced, his voice betraying no particular interest. Earth was one of the newer additions to the Galactic Union. Their application for membership had been approved barely a decade ago, and this would only be their 4th major council meeting. A sharp, high-pitched tone suddenly emanated from Kextool's console. The junior administrator's respiratory flaps fluttered with alarm. "That's unusual," he said, rapidly scanning the security protocols. "The system has automatically flagged the Earth representative's profile and is requesting an immediate application of Protocol 77 Alpha." Bellinara's 4 brains immediately shifted to high alert. Protocol 77 Alpha was a rare security measure, typically reserved for situations involving imminent hostile actions or diplomatic crises of the highest order. "Override and clear," she commanded, her voice remaining steady despite her internal alarm. Kextool attempted the override, his 6 fingers dancing across the interface with increasing agitation. Override rejected. The system has automatically postponed all council meetings for 60 rotations and has notified High Command. "On what grounds?" Bellinara demanded, moving to the console to see for herself. The answer appeared on the screen, highlighted in urgent crimson. 77L combat boots. Standard issue Terran Defense Force pattern. "Combat boots?" Bellinara repeated, her voice rising slightly. "The Earth delegate is wearing combat boots to a diplomatic function?" "Affirmative," Kextool replied, pulling up the detailed scan from the security checkpoint. "Lieutenant Colonel Nolan Reynolds, Earth's designated representative, is currently wearing a formal diplomatic uniform with standard-issue Terran Defense Force combat boots." Bellinara felt her ancestral prey instincts flaring. In the diplomatic traditions of virtually every advanced species in the Galactic Union, wearing combat equipment to negotiations was considered either a grave insult or an implicit threat of imminent hostilities. "Check the diplomatic incident records from previous Earth interactions," she instructed, trying to maintain her composure. Kextool quickly accessed the archives. "Interesting. During the Rigelian trade agreement 3 cycles ago, the Earth representative, a different individual, also wore combat boots. The negotiations concluded 73% faster than projected, with Earth securing significantly favorable terms. And the Centauri territorial dispute last cycle? Same pattern. Combat boots present, negotiations expedited, with outcomes skewed toward Earth's stated objectives by approximately 62%. Bellinara's 4-lobed brain was processing the implications. "They're using intimidation tactics. wearing combat gear to create the impression of readiness for immediate hostilities, if their demands aren't met. That would be consistent with the observed outcomes. Kextool agreed. But why is the system enforcing Protocol 77 Alpha now, when it didn't during previous encounters? Check the security protocol update logs, Bellinara said, her voice lowering to a concerned whisper. Kextool's fingers moved rapidly across the console. Protocol 77 Alpha was independently implemented by the Crystalline Assembly, the Xerian Naval Command, and the Hivemind Collective following their respective encounters with Earth delegates. Our system incorporated these protocol updates during the last security harmonization cycle. So every major power independently created the same security protocol response to Earth's combat footwear, Bellinara mused, her four brains working in parallel to process this revelation. And now that our systems have synchronized, the protocol has been triggered automatically. The Earth delegate has arrived at reception, the system announced, interrupting their conversation. Bellinara straightened her formal administrative robes. I'll handle this personally. Alert Commander Thexil that I'm conducting a preliminary assessment of the situation. Lieutenant Colonel Nolan Reynolds stood at the reception desk, his posture military straight, but his expression open and friendly. His diplomatic uniform, a deep blue adorned with the modest insignia of Earth's unified government, was impeccably tailored. And on his feet, just as the scans had indicated, were polished black combat boots, heavy-soled and unmistakably military in design. Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds. Bellinara greeted him with formal correctness, noting how her four brains simultaneously categorized every detail of his appearance. I am Senior Administrator Bellinara. There appears to be an issue with the scheduling of today's council meeting. An issue, Reynolds replied, his expression shifting to concern. I was informed everything was proceeding according to the predetermined schedule. A security protocol has been automatically triggered, Bellinara explained carefully, resulting in a mandatory postponement of all council meetings for the next 60 rotations. Reynolds frowned. What security protocol? Has there been some kind of threat? Bellinara hesitated, uncertain how to diplomatically address the matter. The protocol was triggered by your footwear, Lieutenant Colonel. My footwear? Reynolds looked down at his boots in genuine confusion. These are standard issue with my formal uniform. I'm representing Earth's Defense Force as well as our diplomatic corps. You are wearing combat boots to a peace council, Bellinara stated, her voice carrying a slight edge despite her efforts at neutrality. Yes, Reynolds acknowledged, still bewildered. They're part of my dress uniform. Is that a problem? Bellinara's four brains struggled to process the human's apparent sincerity. Either he was an exceptionally skilled diplomat, feigning ignorance, or there was a profound cultural misunderstanding at play. Among the civilizations of the Galactic Union, she explained carefully, wearing combat equipment to diplomatic functions is interpreted as a signal of hostile intent or imminent military action. Reynolds' eyes widened. Combat equipment? These are just boots. They're comfortable and practical. I've worn them to every diplomatic function I've ever attended. And have those functions typically concluded with unusual speed, with terms favorable to Earth's interests? Bellinara asked pointedly. Well, yes, Reynolds admitted. I assumed it was because our proposals were reasonable and mutually beneficial. Bellinara observed him closely, searching for signs of deception. To her surprise, she detected none. Lieutenant Colonel, I suggest we consult with our xenoarchaeology department to better understand this cultural discrepancy. In the meantime, I regret to inform you that the council meetings cannot proceed while Protocol 77 Alpha remains in effect. All this because of my boots, Reynolds sounded incredulous. Precisely because of your boots, Bellinara confirmed, wondering if she was being manipulated by an exceptionally clever diplomatic strategy or witnessing a genuine cultural blind spot. While Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds waited in a comfortable but secure reception area, Bellinara convened an emergency meeting with Dr. Velterin, the Zenith Nexus's senior xenoarchaeologist, and his assistants, Pipsor and Kilt. Dr. Velterin's species had evolved to process massive amounts of historical data, their neural pathways optimized for pattern recognition across millennia. His research focused primarily on extinct civilizations, but his expertise extended to all species currently participating in the Galactic Union. "Combat boots," the scientist repeated, his elongated cranium pulsing slightly as he processed the information. "And this has triggered Protocol 77 Alpha. Fascinating. We need to understand the significance of combat footwear in human history," Bellinara explained. "Is this an intentional intimidation tactic, or is there a cultural blind spot we're failing to recognize?" Dr. Veltrin gestured to his assistants. "Pipsor, access the Earth Historical Archives. Kilt, prepare the holographic reconstruction chamber." The team worked with remarkable efficiency. Within moments, the laboratory's central chamber was filled with three-dimensional reconstructions of human battlefields throughout history. "Extraordinary," Dr. Veltrin murmured as he studied the displays. "Combat boots, or their equivalents, appear in virtually every human conflict for the past 6,000 years. From their Bronze Age through their Industrial Revolution and beyond, specialized footwear for combat has been a constant." Bellinara moved through the holographic reconstructions, studying the detailed images of ancient human soldiers. "But surely they don't wear combat equipment during peacetime." "That's the fascinating aspect," Dr. Velterin replied, directing her attention to a different set of holographic displays. "Humans appear to wear combat boots in numerous non-combat contexts. Military personnel wear them as part of dress uniforms for ceremonial functions. Civilians wear stylized versions for practical purposes, or even as fashion statements." "Are you suggesting that humans don't recognize combat boots as combat equipment?" Bellinara asked, her forebrain struggling to reconcile this concept. "I believe they categorize them differently," Dr. Velterin explained. "For humans, the primary purpose of footwear is practical, protection and comfort for the feet. The secondary purpose may be symbolic or status-related, but not necessarily indicative of imminent hostile action. Unlike every other spacefaring species we've encountered," Bellinara noted, "who reserve combat equipment exclusively for combat situations." "Precisely," Dr. Velterin agreed. "For most Galactic Union species, displaying combat equipment in a diplomatic setting would be equivalent to declaring hostile intent. But humans appear to have normalized the presence of combat equipment in their daily lives to a degree that's unprecedented among advanced civilizations." Kilt, the insectoid assistant, clicked his mandibles in excitement. Cross-referencing Earth's diplomatic history reveals something even more intriguing. In the 86 documented first contact scenarios between Earth representatives and other species, 79 included Earth personnel wearing combat boots. In 72 of these cases, the diplomatic proceedings concluded with unusual rapidity and with terms notably favorable to Earth. "They've been inadvertently intimidating every species they've encountered," Bellinara realized, without even being aware of it. "A form of accidental coercive diplomacy," Dr. Velterin confirmed. "The other species, perceiving the combat boots as a threat signal, likely expedited negotiations to avoid potential conflict." Pipsor, whose translucent gills were fluttering with nervous energy, added, "This explains why the Crystalline Assembly, the Xerian Naval Command, and the Hivemind Collective all independently implemented Protocol 77 Alpha after their encounters with Earth diplomats. We need to report this to High Command immediately," Bellinara decided, her four brains already formulating the diplomatic implications. In the secure command center of the Zenith Nexus, Commander Thexil had assembled the intelligence chiefs of the major Galactic Union powers: Quexath of the Crystalline Assembly, Mun of the Hivemind Collective, Raytar of the Xerian Naval Command, and Moran of the Collective Consciousness. Bellinara and Dr. Velterin presented their findings, supported by the holographic reconstructions and historical data. "You're suggesting," Commander Thexil said slowly, his four-chambered brain visibly pulsing beneath his translucent cranium, "that humans have been wearing combat equipment to diplomatic functions for their entire history, without recognizing its significance as a threat display?" "The evidence supports this conclusion," Dr. Velterin confirmed. "Humans appear to categorize footwear primarily by function, rather than symbolic meaning. Combat boots represent practicality and durability to them, not necessarily imminent hostile action." "Irrelevant!" Raytar of the Zirian Naval Command interjected, his tentacular appendages rippling with agitation. "Intent does not alter effect. If a species displays threat signals, whether intentionally or not, the prudent response is defensive caution." "Agreed," Quexoth of the Crystalline Assembly added, her crystalline form refracting the room's light into complex patterns. Protocol 77 Alpha was implemented after careful analysis of human diplomatic patterns. Their representatives wear combat equipment, and they consistently achieve favorable outcomes through implied threat. The statistical correlation is undeniable. Mun of the Hivemind Collective noted, its collective voice emerging from multiple speaker nodes simultaneously. Humans wearing combat boots during negotiations achieve a 62.7% more favorable outcome than baseline expectations. "So what do we do?" Commander Thexil asked, his four brains struggling to process the conflicting imperatives of diplomatic protocol and security concerns. "Do we maintain Protocol 77 Alpha and indefinitely postpone all council meetings until the Earth representative changes his footwear? Or do we acknowledge this cultural difference and proceed despite the apparent threat display?" "I recommend direct communication," Moran of the Collective Consciousness suggested, its voice resonating with the harmonics of countless merged minds. "Explain the cultural significance of combat equipment in Galactic Union protocols, and request that the Earth representative modify his appearance accordingly." "And if he refuses?" Raytar demanded. "If this is indeed a deliberate intimidation tactic disguised as cultural misunderstanding?" "We have no evidence suggesting deliberate deception," Bellinara pointed out. Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds appeared genuinely confused by our concern over his footwear. "Another possibility," Dr. Velterin interjected thoughtfully, "is that this could be a deeply ingrained psychological pattern in human development. Their species evolved as persistence hunters on a high-gravity world with numerous predators. The psychological comfort of combat readiness may be so fundamental to their psychology that they've incorporated elements of it into their formal and ceremonial contexts without conscious awareness." Commander Thexil's four brains pulsed with increasing agitation. "This is unprecedented. We cannot proceed with council meetings while Protocol 77 Alpha remains in effect. Yet we cannot simply exclude Earth's representative without diplomatic consequence. I propose a compromise," Bellinara suggested. "Explain the situation to Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds and suggest an alternative form of footwear for council functions. If he agrees to this modification, we can override Protocol 77 Alpha for this specific instance and proceed with the scheduled meetings." After lengthy debate, the High Command reluctantly agreed to Bellinara's proposal. The senior administrator returned to the reception area, where Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds had been waiting with remarkable patience. "Lieutenant Colonel," she began carefully, "I've consulted with our Xenoarchaeology department and with High Command regarding the footwear situation." Reynolds nodded, his expression a mixture of confusion and diplomatic restraint. "And have you determined why my boots have triggered a security protocol?" "In the diplomatic traditions of the Galactic Union," Bellinara explained, "combat equipment is worn exclusively during actual combat operations. Displaying such equipment in a diplomatic context is interpreted as a signal of imminent hostile intent." "These are just boots," Reynolds protested, looking down at his polished black footwear. "They're comfortable and practical. They're standard issue with my dress uniform. Nevertheless, Bellinara continued, they have triggered Protocol 77 Alpha, which mandates the postponement of all council meetings. This protocol was independently implemented by multiple Galactic Union powers, following previous encounters with Earth representatives wearing similar footwear. Reynolds frowned. Are you suggesting that Earth has been accidentally threatening other species just by our choice of shoes? That appears to be the case, Bellinara confirmed. Our xenoarchaeologists believe this represents a fundamental cultural difference in how humans categorize and symbolize combat equipment. Reynolds was silent for a long moment, processing this information. So what happens now? Am I expected to return to Earth and request different footwear? That could take weeks. And these council meetings are scheduled to begin today. Would it be possible, Bellinara suggested cautiously, for you to wear alternative footwear for the duration of the council meetings? Something that would not be categorized as combat equipment. Reynolds considered this. I did bring civilian shoes for off-duty hours. They're not part of my formal uniform, but I suppose I could wear them if it's that important. It would be greatly appreciated, Bellinara said, her four brains simultaneously calculating the diplomatic ramifications of this compromise. Once you have changed your footwear, we can override Protocol 77 Alpha and proceed with the scheduled meetings. All this because of my boots, Reynolds muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. I'll change immediately. Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds returned to his assigned quarters aboard the Zenith Nexus. After several hours of diplomatic limbo and discussions, his feet were aching from standing in his formal combat boots. With a sigh of relief that was only partially related to the diplomatic situation, he removed the heavy black boots and replaced them with the comfortable loafers he had packed for casual occasions. The change took less than 30 seconds, but its impact reverberated throughout the Zenith Nexus's sophisticated monitoring systems. In the Security Control Center, alarms suddenly blared as the status indicators for the Earth representative shifted from combat ready to civilian configuration, a status designation that had never before been recorded in the system's extensive history. Kextool's 6 fingers froze above his console as the alerts cascaded across his screen. Senior Administrator, he called urgently to Bellinara. The Earth representative's status has changed. Bellinara moved quickly to the console, her four brains processing the new information with increasing alarm. He's removed the combat boots, she observed. But why would the system interpret this as a significant security event? Because no Earth representative has ever been documented wearing non-combat footwear during diplomatic functions, Kextool explained, rapidly scanning the historical records. The system has no precedent for interpreting this change. The artificial intelligence responsible for security assessment on the Zenith Nexus, a collaborative development between the Crystalline Assembly and the HiveMind Collective, immediately began generating possible interpretations of this unprecedented status change. Warning, the system announced in its carefully modulated voice. Status change detected in Earth representative. Combat readiness indicators have been deliberately reduced. Possible interpretations. Psychological deception tactic. Preparation for alternative form of confrontation. Attempt to circumvent security protocols. In the High Command Center, the status change triggered immediate alarm. Commander Thexil and the intelligence chiefs had been monitoring the situation closely, and the sudden shift in the Earth representative's status prompted an emergency reconvening of their earlier meeting. This is highly unusual, Commander Thexil noted, his four brains visibly pulsing with increased activity. No Earth representative has ever been documented altering their combat readiness status during diplomatic proceedings. It could be a deception tactic, Raytar of the Zerian Naval Command suggested, his tentacles rippling with agitation, appearing to reduce combat readiness to lull us into a false sense of security. Or it could be precisely what we requested, Bellinara pointed out. Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds agreed to change his footwear to non-combat equipment. This status change indicates he has complied with our request. The timing is suspicious. Quexath of the Crystalline Assembly noted. Her crystalline form, refracting patterns of concern. Why wait several hours before making this change? Was he communicating with Earth Command for instructions? Developing a new strategy? We are overthinking this, Moran of the Collective Consciousness suggested, its harmonious voice cutting through the rising tension. The simplest explanation is that the human has complied with our cultural requirements by changing to non-combat footwear. But what if this is a strategic feint? Mun of the Hive Mind Collective countered. What if reducing apparent combat readiness is preparation for some unexpected diplomatic or even hostile action? Commander Thexel's four brains were visibly struggling with the conflicting interpretations. We face a dilemma, he acknowledged. If we continue to delay the council meetings despite the Earth representatives' compliance with our request, we risk creating the impression that we are engaging in deliberate diplomatic obstruction. Earth might interpret this as hostile intent on our part. But if we proceed with the meetings and this change in status represents some unknown human strategy, Raytar warned, we may be walking into a diplomatic trap. The tension in the command center was palpable as each species representative calculated the potential risks and benefits according to their own cultural and strategic frameworks. I believe we must proceed with the council meetings, Bellinara finally stated, her four brains having reached a consensus. The Earth representative has complied with our request to remove combat equipment. Continuing to delay would create a greater diplomatic risk than proceeding. After intense debate, the High Command reluctantly agreed. Protocol 77 Alpha was manually overridden, and the council meetings were rescheduled to begin immediately. Just 4 minutes after changing his shoes, Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds received notification that the security protocol had been lifted, and the council meetings would proceed according to the original schedule. He was both relieved and bewildered by the timing, unaware that his simple act of changing footwear had triggered a security crisis and emergency high command meeting. As he entered the Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Union, Reynolds was acutely conscious of his civilian loafers, comfortable but distinctly informal compared to his otherwise impeccable diplomatic uniform. He noted with interest the subtle reactions of the various species representatives as he took his assigned seat. The rippling tentacles of the Xerian delegation, the shifting crystalline patterns of the Crystalline Assembly members, the synchronized movements of the Hive Mind Collective's multiple bodies. What Reynolds couldn't know was that every representative in the chamber had been briefed on the footwear situation and had been instructed to proceed with diplomatic discussions despite the potential for unexpected human strategic maneuvers. The tension in the room was palpable, though completely mysterious to the Earth representative. Commander Thexil called the council to order with a formal declaration of the unification cycle's commencement. Representatives of the Galactic Union, he announced, his four brains synchronizing to project an aura of calm authority despite his internal concern. We gather in the spirit of cooperative diplomacy to address matters of mutual interest and concern. The council proceeded to the first agenda item, a trade agreement revision that had been in negotiation for nearly 3 cycles. To Reynolds' surprise and satisfaction, the discussions moved with unprecedented efficiency. Points of contention that had previously resulted in lengthy debates were resolved with minimal resistance. Compromises were offered before he had even fully articulated Earth's position on various matters. Similar patterns emerged throughout the day's sessions. Territorial disputes that had remained unresolved for multiple cycles were suddenly amenable to compromise solutions. Resource allocation proposals that had previously been mired in bureaucratic hesitation were approved with remarkable speed. When Reynolds presented Earth's proposal for a surplus food distribution program designed to address nutritional deficiencies in developing regions of the galaxy, he was met with immediate and enthusiastic support from virtually every delegation. The proposal was approved in less than 1 rotation, a record for substantive policy implementation in the Galactic Union's history. What Reynolds couldn't know was that every species represented in the council chamber was operating under the assumption that his change in footwear represented some sophisticated and potentially unpredictable human diplomatic strategy. Rather than risk provoking whatever unknown response might be triggered by opposition, the representatives were collectively choosing the path of least resistance. The day's council sessions concluded with unprecedented productivity. Trade agreements were finalized, territorial disputes resolved, and resource allocation protocols established, all with efficiency that defied the Galactic Union's usual deliberative pace. As the formal proceedings concluded, Reynolds found himself approached by Commander Thexil, whose four brains were still struggling to interpret the day's events. "Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds," the commander began carefully, "the Council has accomplished more in a single day than in the previous 3 unification cycles combined. Earth's contributions have been most effective." "Thank you, Commander," Reynolds replied with genuine satisfaction. "I believe the outcomes will benefit all parties involved. The spirit of cooperation has been remarkable." "Indeed," Commander Thexil agreed, studying the human with intense curiosity. "Your change in approach seems to have facilitated unprecedented diplomatic efficiency." Reynolds glanced down at his loafers, still bemused by the entire situation. "If I'd known comfortable shoes would make such a difference in galactic diplomacy, I'd have worn them to every meeting," he joked. Commander Thexil's four brains simultaneously processed this statement, interpreting it as confirmation of a deliberate human psychological strategy. "Most interesting," he replied. "The Galactic Union appreciates Earth's flexible approach to diplomatic protocols." As Reynolds returned to his quarters, still unaware of the complex interpretations being applied to his simple change of footwear, the High Command convened a final emergency meeting to assess the day's unprecedented events. The human psychological strategy was remarkably effective. Raytar of the Zirian Naval Command acknowledged reluctantly. By suddenly shifting from combat readiness to a civilian configuration, they created a state of diplomatic uncertainty that expedited negotiations. "We should update Protocol 77 Alpha," Quexath of the Crystalline Assembly suggested. "When Earth representatives display combat boots, implement standard postponement procedures. When they shift to civilian footwear, prioritize immediate diplomatic resolution to minimize unpredictable outcomes." "Agreed," Moon of the Hivemind Collective added. "This appears to be a sophisticated form of psychological manipulation. By alternating between apparent combat readiness and civilian configuration, humans create optimal conditions for achieving their diplomatic objectives." Commander Thexil's four brains pulsed with concentrated thought. "Implement the protocol updates immediately," he instructed. "And add a notation to all diplomatic files. Earth representatives displaying combat footwear. Standard delay protocols. Earth representatives displaying civilian footwear. Priority diplomatic resolution recommended." What none of the Galactic Union representatives could understand was that Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds had changed his footwear for the simplest of reasons. His feet were hurting after standing for hours in formal combat boots. The diplomatic breakthrough that resulted was entirely accidental, a confluence of cultural misunderstanding and coincidental timing. In the following days, the updated Protocol 77 Alpha was disseminated throughout the Galactic Union's diplomatic network. Every species' security systems were reconfigured to respond differently to the two observed states of human diplomatic representatives. Combat ready, indicated by combat boots, would trigger standard postponement protocols, while civilian configuration, indicated by non-combat footwear, would trigger expedited diplomatic procedures. As the unification cycle continued, Reynolds remained blissfully unaware of the complex security and diplomatic infrastructure that had been built around his choice of shoes. He continued to wear his comfortable loafers to council meetings, marveling at the unprecedented efficiency with which galactic diplomacy was suddenly operating. I should wear comfortable shoes to more diplomatic functions, he remarked to Bellinara during a brief recess. Things seem to move much more smoothly when everyone's relaxed. Bellinara's four brains simultaneously processed this statement, interpreting it as further confirmation of Earth's sophisticated psychological tactics. Indeed, Lieutenant Colonel, she replied carefully. Your approach has been most effective in facilitating diplomatic outcomes. For the next decade, Earth representatives to the Galactic Union would remain puzzled by the intense interest other species seem to take in their footwear. Security protocols would continue to automatically postpone meetings when combat boots were detected, and expedite proceedings when civilian shoes were observed. Xenoarchaeologists throughout the galaxy would continue to study human footwear patterns, developing increasingly complex theories about the psychological and strategic significance of different shoe styles. Diplomatic academies would add courses on human footwear diplomacy to their curricula, analyzing historical data for patterns and predictive models. And humans, for their part, would gradually begin to notice the correlation between their choice of shoes and diplomatic outcomes. Though they would never fully comprehend the elaborate security and psychological frameworks that had been built around this single cultural misunderstanding. Years later, when Earth began developing multifunctional footwear that could transform from combat boots to casual shoes at the touch of a button, the Galactic Union would once again find itself in a state of diplomatic confusion, unsure how to categorize or respond to this new variable in human psychological warfare. Commander Thexil, upon receiving the first reports of these transforming shoes, would feel his four brains pulse with simultaneous resignation and admiration. Note for diplomatic archives, he would dictate to his personal log. Humans have developed yet another layer of footwear-based psychological manipulation. Recommend immediate convening of High Command to develop appropriate response protocols. And somewhere on Earth, a shoe designer would receive unexpected funding from the unified government's diplomatic corps, completely unaware that their innovative footwear concepts were being interpreted as sophisticated tools of interstellar psychological warfare. The great misunderstanding would continue, a testament to the complex and often absurd nature of cross-cultural communication in a galaxy filled with diverse evolutionary histories and perceptual frameworks. And in diplomatic circles throughout the Galactic Union, a new saying would emerge. Beware the changing shoes of humans, for their comfort may be your concession.